Good afternoon. We're here at KFUG, live in the KFUG audience, and we have two special guests. I'm Wes Nunn, I'm your host. We're here with Joan Miles and special guest Dean Wilson and Kevin Bingham. We're here to talk about the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal decision and things like that. But first, Joan is going to open.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Joan Miles. Our show is on KFUG every Sunday from 4 to 5. Our host is Wes Nunn, and our co-host is Jamie Yarbrough. Jamie won't be with us today. He's out of town, but he will be back next Sunday. Our new call-in number is 460-6100. Please call in. We would love to know what you want to talk about. Today, our guests, as Wes said, are Kevin Bingham, owner of Glenn's Bakery, and Sheriff Dean Wilson, retired. First, I would like to bring you up to date on my meeting with Paige Swan, principal at Crescent Elk School, whom I talked about on the show last week. Paige is a good man, and he's very much in favor of having a staging area for the homeless, but his hands are full running Crescent Elk School. I've been there twice to meet with Paige, plus 2 other times to set up those meetings. And but Paige has his hands full running that school. When I was there on several occasions, the activity in his office is dizzying. But I want to repeat the recommendation from Paige, which I mentioned last week. He said everyone needs to watch the YouTube video "Seattle is Dying," and you must watch it through to the end to learn about solutions to the homeless problem. And you will begin to understand it's not a homeless problem, it's a drug problem. Now to a different subject. We are starting to bring together a kind of think tank here in Crescent City of smart, determined people who understand our homeless/drug problems and can do what has to be done to solve them. This is my proposed list. Tony Barnes, owner of Tab and Associates. Kevin Bingham, owner of Glenn's Bakery. Logan Howell, whom I haven't met. Lieutenant Colonel David Cooper, Roger Gitlin, Bob Berkowitz, Dean Wilson, and Jerry Johnson. This list hasn't been approved, and I may have left someone out. Some of these people are working behind the scenes and are less vocal. But I think it would be helpful to get them together, hopefully on my show, and hear what they are doing. And so let's hear first from Kevin Bingham. Kevin, Tony Barnes is always telling me how hard you are working to solve the homeless problem. And this week, you got a favorable vote through at the Board of Supervisors and the City Council. Please tell us about it.
Joan, thank you, first of all, for inviting me here to this important forum and to discuss the very important issue that's affecting the entire county, not just the city, but the entire county. As you were stating, I've been kind of prodded a bit by Mr. Tony Barnes and his wife, Leslie. They've been very much impacted, being that they own a lot of the downtown buildings, by this homeless issue. First of all, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. And, you know, you were speaking about the staging area and the comment by Paige Swan. The think tank in Seattle, it's called Discovery Institute. I've got copies of that I can forward to you, but they did a very in-depth piece on the issue. Seattle spent $1 billion last year to try to battle this problem. What they found out through their studies in the Discovery Institute is, in fact, it is not a true homeless problem, but is more of an addiction and mental health, which, of course, can lead to homelessness. So people can kind of get thrown by the word homeless, but what we need to realize is here in Del Norte County, we have a heroin epidemic, a huge heroin epidemic, Methamphetamine's always been here, but now we've got young people, 18 years old, on heroin. And so it affects us all. But in answer to your comment about the recent vote by the Board of Supervisors and the City Council, the Ninth Circuit came down with this ruling last year that you cannot cite or arrest people who are homeless. It's all based on old, existing, cruel and unusual punishment laws. So they have determined that it is cruel and unusual to punish or cite a person monetarily for being, quote, homeless. And so that's why we see so much of the dwellings in Beachfront Park and all over and down in LA. You can't even walk through downtown. San Francisco's the same way. Portland's the same way. Thousands and thousands of people. I think they have 60,000 in LA. We have approximately 300 here in town, according to the boots on the ground count. But so they can no longer, make these people leave if they're camping on public ground. They're allowed to sleep and rest. However, they cannot erect structures or impede the public right-of-way, which would be your sidewalks, your parks where kids play soccer, the beaches, things like that. They cannot do that. This ruling has basically tied the hands of law enforcement. And a big element to this problem is the criminal element, because people who are addicted to heroin have to have a fix every day or they get extremely sick. So then you have hundreds of people every night coming out of their dwellings, be it in the forest or at Beachfront Park. They're looking for something to steal. And that sounds harsh, but it's the God's truth. I have a family member who's an addict. They're looking for something to steal. Bicycles have become currency in Del Norte County. Last week, Roger Gitlin held a cleanup on the beach there at Beachfront and the surrounding area. And if you notice on his page, there's a huge pile of bicycle parts. And they Frankenstein them so that take parts from one, add to the other so that they can't be recognizable so easily. And they trade those for dope. So the reason that I got involved was to the Ninth Circuit ruling is up for appeal. They're trying to get the Supreme Court to revisit this matter. Boise, Idaho is the town that was affected, and they're the ones that were sued by the ACLU. So there's a lot of cities and counties in California that have joined on in support of Boise to try to protect their own rights and the rights of law enforcement to be able to try and curb this criminal element that is within the homeless population. So then I started emailing the city officials, both Eric Weir and Blake Inscore, the mayor. They've both been very attentive and helpful. And also I started emailing the county supervisors, Chairperson Lori Cowan. She's also been very helpful. So they had to get this, they call it an amicus brief, which is basically a friend of the court kind of a brief, which is saying we support Boise, Idaho in their efforts to get clarity on this ruling. The Ninth Circuit includes Idaho, Montana, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Hawaii, Alaska, California, Arizona. I mean, it's a huge population base. It doesn't just affect Boise. It affects all of us. So the board held special sessions, both the city council and the board of supervisors, last week to vote in favor of us as a community joining this amicus brief that's saying basically we want clarity on this ruling from the 9th District. We want, because it's quite confusing. Everyone's interpreting it a little bit differently. They want clarity and they want some relief from it. So that's why the city and the county both voted. The county was 4-1 with Hemmingson opposing the matter. The city council voted unanimously to support it. So that was a cost of $5,000 tops as a retainer to the law firm that's bringing this brief back to the Supreme Court. There's approximately 30 cities and counties joining this brief. They're not intended to slam the homeless per se, but to give clarity to law enforcement as to what we can do to curb this criminal element that lives within the current homeless population. Again, the brief's not intended to slam the homeless. Without law and order, and with Sheriff Wilson being here, he can attest to this, without law and order, the city will soon be unlivable and is well on its way to being. The crime is an epidemic. For the first time in California's history, more people are leaving the state than are coming into the state. You know, for 100 years, California was the envy of the world. Everyone wanted to move to California. Now you've got more people leaving the state. Then another aspect, people were... do you have anything to add to the law enforcement angle on that, what I've said, Sheriff?
You know, I think we talked about it. We talked about it a little earlier, before we got on the radio, and it truly is an addiction issue, not a homeless issue. And as I wrote in one of my Facebook posts, you know, this is a self-inflicted wound that California did to itself, because we basically decriminalized drug behavior. And then in the process of decriminalizing drug behavior, releasing a lot of the individuals that were on drug-only crimes out of our prisons and into the world, back out into society without any mechanism to try to keep them off the drugs or utilization of the drugs. And then on top of that, we really eliminated a lot of the property crimes. We elevated the ceiling for property crimes. So, you know, you can steal up to $1,000 worth of property, and the likelihood of you ever being prosecuted, ever seeing a day in jail, or ever being punished in any way for most of these crimes, especially in our urban areas, where violent crime is, of course, going to be the more serious, you know, are going to get prosecuted. But the low end of property crime only offenses likely will never have anything happen to them. And the thieves know this. I mean, the criminals know this. You know,
the word is out.
And if you watch that movie, you know, Seattle is Dying, or, you know, my wife can attest in our business here, you know, people boldly walk in, grab things right off your counter and walk out. And they're not afraid of being stopped by law enforcement, because they know even if they are stopped, they're at the most they're going to get booked and released. Even if they have a long history of these types of crimes. You know, it used to be for petty theft, if you committed your third petty theft, it was a felony. If you were convicted, I shouldn't say committed, but convicted of more than 3 petty thefts, your next conviction was a felony conviction. And those kinds of things have been all done away with. So when people know that they can steal whatever they want in our communities and they're not going to get punished for that, they may get a citation, they may get booked and released, but they're not actually ever going to see a day in jail.
That's right.
For it. You have what we are seeing
Recipe
throughout.
for disaster.
You know, is that decent people who need to protect their property protected and secure are finding it far more difficult these days, because people that are out supporting their addiction habits, which are no longer, as we used to do, arrest them for being under the influence, arrest them for possession of drugs. And then we always had, as we used to call, the stick and the carrot. You know, you would hold incarceration over their head. You'll go to state prison, or you'll go to jail for a year, or you go to drug court, or you go to rehab. And we would send these people to rehab or drug court, and, you know, a percentage of them would comply and get off the drugs, but today that no longer happens. There is no stick anymore. And so, because we no longer get them into the system, they're no longer having the benefits that society had provided for them with rehabilitation, drug rehabilitation, and other sources are no longer being they're
leveraged.
Still,
yes,
they're still there, but there's no impetus to the addict to stop his behavior. And the reason why you see so many homeless, and why over 90% of the people out there homeless are addicts of some sort, drug, alcohol, whatever. They're drug addicts. And the reason being is that addiction, whatever money you have, is solely to make sure that you can get addicted again, that you can get your next fix.
That's right.
And it doesn't
Sadly,
matter how
that's
much
true.
money you give them, they will continue to do that. That is the the thing of addiction. And society has said, well, it's an illness, and we're no longer going to punish you like it's a crime. So now what we have is this 60,000 in Los Angeles, 10,000 in San Francisco, but there are far more people suffering that are not on the streets, that are being taken care of inside, the city walls.
It's unbelievable.
But what we no longer do, and this is not compassion. This is in no way compassion for a human being, as we no longer even see them when we drive. We step over them. We walk by them. We ignore them completely. Unfortunately, those with mental health problems that we see walking our city streets and talking to themselves, they become just another person amongst the masses of homeless that we no longer see, and in many places no longer care about. And, when I was in law enforcement for 36 years, this kind of behavior would never have been tolerated or accepted. And society had mechanisms to help and be compassionate, charging these people under the crime as a crime and getting them into the system so the system could help them out of their addiction was not, what was a way that society could force these individuals to get them into compassion. We've given up on that model, and we've abandoned these people to their own addiction. And in their addiction, we see, death, disease, and we have now become almost oblivious and blind to their suffering. And that is in no way where we should be as a society, nor as a people, nor as a country. We have to hold people accountable for their behavior, and we also have to be intolerant of certain behavior within civil society. Otherwise, you have no society.
Yes, that's true. That's a very good point. Speaking about the element of crime, Walmart, I think we talked about this last time. Walmart had over $1.5 million in loss last year. That's why they stopped all of the campers from camping in their parking lot, first time in their history, and they've now hired a full-time security guard. I talked with Safeway manager. They're not allowed to give out the number of their loss, but I'm sure it's probably close to 1 million. If you go in there just on a daily basis, several times a day, multiple times, people will walk in, they'll grab a bottle of alcohol and walk out because they know they're not going to be arrested. One of our local sheriff's deputies, I won't give his name, but he told me a couple weeks back that they are not allowed to arrest for misdemeanor offenses. It's actually illegal for them to arrest. He said they still try to, put a curb on it, but their hands are tied. So Sheriff Wilson is right in that. I wanted to make one point. We've had so many people say, with us discussing this issue that, you're against the homeless, you're haters, you don't care about your fellow man, all this. That couldn't be farther from the truth. I was in ministry for a long time. I was a music minister. I take care of a dementia patient. I took care of my father for years. We're all compassionate people here in this room. We all care about our fellow man. But the majority rules in all aspects of our government. And if you allow the lawlessness and non-productive members of society, not to put anybody down, but if you allow them to run rampant over the rights of those who are law-abiding and whose taxes actually pay for all these services, like rehabilitation, mental health, the social services department in California State, then pretty soon there's nobody left to pay for this. You let all these other aspects take over, the people who are working and paying taxes, pretty soon there is no society. It's just become completely broken down. And as the sheriff just said, according to Dr. Drew Pinsky, who's very active on the internet and on the news with the situation in Los Angeles, this is not a homeless issue. This is an addiction and mental health issue. And the federal government last year had millions and millions of dollars allocated for permanent mental health residential facilities, and California state government refused those dollars. So as the sheriff was pointing out, we have a large number of people who are mentally ill. Like I said, I take care of a mentally ill patient, and yet California state government. So there's the issues there. The crime is an epidemic level. Law enforcement hands are tied. The illegal encampments, we have about 4 of them. We have one behind Crescent Hay and Feed called the Ruth Compound. It's a very large homeless encampment. The local gentleman that came through riding his bicycle for the 7th time around the world from Italy, and whose bike was stolen there at the Chevron, that's where his bike ended up, out there. And then they have the encampment behind the transfer station. They have one out on Sparky Countess's private property across the street from Walmart. I hear there's one on Old Mill. But they're rife with crime and addiction. Not to put anybody down, but it's a fact. They're rife with crime. Sheriff's Department has told me that it's unsafe for them to go out into the Roof compound. It's unsafe for them to go out there. So this has become a real public health problem. In LA, you've got diseases that were eradicated in the Middle Ages coming back. For instance, the black or bubonic plague, which is spread by fleas on rats. They bite the rats, they get the disease, they bite humans. Well, the rat population is an epidemic in Los Angeles. They do not have a rodent control policy because they're afraid if they poison them, then the environmental hazards to birds and things like this. So the rats are feeding on the leftover food that homeless people and transients throw away into the streets. And ended up, one of the ladies at City Hall, I just spoke to them this last week. She sued the City Hall in Los Angeles because she got typhus from the rats that are an epidemic inside of City Hall. So then you've got 50 million people were killed. 60% of the population of Europe were killed by the Black Plague, and it's now back in Los Angeles. Typhus is in Los Angeles. MRSA. There was one of the gentlemen that was actually helping the homeless people, went out to help some people. He stepped in human waste. He got a flesh-eating bacteria. They had to amputate his leg. Now, he was quoted as saying he would be glad to give his other leg if he could actually go out and help these people. Tuberculosis. Now, this last week, they have a case of leprosy, a biblical plague, in Los Angeles. So now these diseases are present, and the cause is filth and inadequate sanitation, the food and the trash on the street that breed the rats. So again, I'm not putting down the homeless, but I'm just stating the facts of what's happening.
I heard Drew Pinsky on TV last night, and he said, where are the environmentalists? 60,000 people in LA living in filth, which is flowing into the river. And his comment also was the drug addicted don't realize they need help. This is the last chapter of the opioid crisis. Transition to heroin drove them to the streets. Bottom line, if you don't treat, institutionalize, or contain heroin addicts, they will die. People who are maintaining the status quo are committing homicide.
I heard that.
And also, Seattle is dying. The Rhode Island model is you have to arrest these people and put them in jail and put them on opiate blockers, you know? So we have to get the ability to institutionalize them back. We have to do that. Put them on Narcan, methadone, and so on. Okay?
Yeah, they said that, as he indicates, I disagree. And just in one thing he says is that the heroin that drove him to the streets. Well, it's our changes in our enforcement policy that has driven to the streets, because before they would have been taken off the streets. They would have been arrested. They would have been, incarcerated at some point in time, and charges would have been pressed. And then again, stick and carrot. They would have been put into programs or some other methodology, rehab or some other program, to try to get them the help that they needed to stop their addiction, to try to change that addiction pattern and the patterns in their lives. And unfortunately, this is, when we've decide to leave them to their own devices, basically, and allow them to go and live their lives as they so choose to be enveloped in a life of addiction. Well, this is how it plays out. This is how
You're seeing it firsthand.
That type of attitude, transforms our communities.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Sheriff. That's the truth. And Dr. Pinsky has had quite a few episodes on the national news. It's getting national news coverage at this point almost every night. And to the point that something's got to be done. So, we all know there's a problem. So what are we going to do about it? I wanted to give a shout out to Supervisor Chairperson Cowan. She's been very active. Last week we had a meeting, Mr. Barnes and myself, Supervisor Chairperson Cowan, Blake Inscore, City Manager Eric Weir, and then David Cooper's wife, Paulette Cooper, as well as Tony Barnes' property manager, Kaylee. We all had a meeting, just an informal meeting to try to begin to find out what we can do in the long term and short term. The short term is, what can we do to enforce our ordinances? Our hands are kind of tied right now by the 9th District's rulings, so that's why we filed an amicus brief. But in the long term, what are we going to do? One of the gals, Paulette Cooper, she has a daughter who's an addict, and they know firsthand the problems with addiction. And, there is not a residential treatment facility in our community. Now, they have a Suboxone program at the Del Norte Community Clinic. It's very early in the morning, which I found was ironic because most people who are addicted don't want to get up early in the morning. I don't even want to get up early in the morning without a good coffee. But a comment was made at that meeting that, we are not San Francisco. We don't have the San Francisco problems. Well, yes, we do. It's just not as on a big of a scale, but we certainly have the San Francisco problems. Heroin's an epidemic. The cartels are here. They come out of Eureka and they furnish and supply the heroin that comes out of Mexico. People don't want to hear that, but it does. And then it's on our streets. For our local children, they start smoking it. Pretty soon, they're starting to inject it. So we need a methadone clinic. Now, I don't really know how people feel about the needle exchange program. It's been a controversial issue, and now San Francisco has hundreds of thousands of needles in the gutter because they're giving out free needles so people don't get HIV and hepatitis and this from dirty needles. But then there's got to be some way that, you have to turn in a needle to get a new needle. I don't support that as much as I support the laws being changed where law enforcement can offer the stick and carrot. Hey, you want to go to jail, or we can offer you a chance to change your life. We can offer you a in-house treatment facility here in Del Norte County. What a shame that we don't have that when you've got our local children that are addicts. They should have a methadone clinic here and Suboxone program. Tony Costa is in charge of that program at the Del Norte Community Clinic. Very nice person, an ex-addict herself. She will state that. So I think there's a two-pronged approach. There's the short term and the long term. The short term is people cannot erect structures in public right-of-ways. So when you've got kids playing soccer on Saturdays and they're being harassed by transient folks who are mentally ill and addicted, law enforcement's got to be a presence there in Beachfront Park. Last week there was a gentleman, the children went out. I counted over 100 myself. Stephanie Jones and I were down by the restaurant and we saw them. We're having a field trip in the park, cleaning the park. I think they were maybe protesting climate change or something. Anyhow, it was a wonderful thing to see all the kids out in the park doing something for humanity. That's a very worthy thing to teach a child. Well, in the middle of this, they had a belligerent transient person going around and around them, stalking them and harassing these children, school children, elementary. So finally law enforcement was called, and then later that day I talked to Blake Inscore, our city mayor. He had an incident with the same person over by the pool. And he finally calmed the gentleman down, the person down, I think it was a gentleman, And the man was obviously, as he said, was mentally disturbed. So he offered him help. He offered to get him to Daily Bread Ministries and and the gentleman refused the help. And so then what do? You cannot force people to change their life. I know that with my own life. I've had to make decisions to change my life. We've all had to make decisions. What will we accept in our life? What will we not accept in our life? What kind of a person? But like Sheriff was saying, and Joan was saying, I think that, when a person is to that point, they cannot think for themselves because they're only thinking about the next fix. With heroin, for those that don't know this, it's a little different than methamphetamine. When you don't have your fix of heroin, you get so extremely physically sick that you'd sell your mother to get a little bit more heroin. And I know this from a family member who is an addict, 18 years old, in this community. So the meeting we had with Supervisor Cowan and everyone last week was beneficial in that we kind of started the ball rolling. And I think Supervisor Chairperson Cowan is working hand in hand with Daily Bread Ministries to get more funding and get, there has to be private funding or grant funding. There's no free money. But she has been working to get them more beds and get them into a place where they're going to be a 24/7 shelter. That will help. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to the 300 people we have in town.
Yeah, but what you're going to find is, and this has always been a discussion that we've had when we've talked about building shelters in Delaware County, shelters for the homeless, and this is what it. This is just the reality of it. Is if you built a 35-bed facility in Delaware County, you would have extra bed space every day. And the reason being is that you will have some people that will use it, but that'll be very few. If you estimate 300 individuals that are homeless out there. And the reason being is that any shelter that you build is going to have certain rules of conduct.
That's right.
That's why places like Daily Bread Ministry, although they have people that they help and do go there, they don't often have to turn people away, because even in their facility they have certain rules of conduct. And the people that are out here on the street living the way they live, they're addicted to lifestyle. That lifestyle is not conducive to rules of conduct and behavior. They're not going to go and utilize the facilities.
That's the truth.
Where they can't drink, they can't smoke, they can't do drugs, they can't, do the things that they have, their addictive behavior and lifestyle chooses them and they choose to live out that life of addiction. They're not going to do it in a
That's a very good
homeless
point.
facility. But it gives law enforcement the tools they need to then do as the Ninth Circuit says. If we have a place for you to be, then I can keep you from camping anywhere inside my city limit.
That's right.
Until those facilities are overburdened, once they become overburdened, then I can no longer enforce the law.
Right.
But until they become overburdened, law enforcement can keep the people out of the parks, out of the streets, out of your public lands, basically, and enforce the laws as we used to do it within the communities. And so
that's a very good point. And that was one thing I was going to get to next with this meeting we had. They're talking about the improving daily bread. They're talking about the tiny house villages that are currently over in Medford. Those don't comply with the Ninth Circuit because they're not heated. You've got to have an indoor heated facility. It doesn't have to be brick and mortar. The plan that I had proposed to the city and the county was to use a series of Army tents, which are heavy-duty military tents, and they're ducted for heating. It would be a temporary shelter. We could put up the tents and legally have enough room for the 300 we have here in town. And that's the count that Lori, Supervisor Chairperson Cowan, gave me at the meeting, was approximately 288 around 300 people. So we could do that for $75,000. They could be put up with donated labor, and I've already contacted a lot of different stores that would donate towards that. Of course, then you'd need some enforcement there, staffing, and some food and things like that. That can all be worked out. But basically, once you purchase those tents, these are great big Army tents. They're not going to blow over in the wind. They're good enough for our people all over the world, our military. Once you purchase them, you don't have any more expense with that. But then, if a person that you offer help to, like Sheriff was just stating, you say, okay, you don't have any place to live. We've got a place for you to come and stay. It's warm, it's dry. We have mental health facilities coming there, which they're starting to do at Daily Bread for the first time. They've got social services and mental health involved now at this point. So we have all these things we can offer you for help, and including the Suboxone program. Well, then if these people don't want to go and they choose to continue this lifestyle, which is a form of suicide, not to mention the effects it has on the community as a whole, then law enforcement, as the sheriff just stated, law enforcement is free then to cite them. If they're parking down at beachfront and they're either, using the restroom in the grass where our children play every day, this stuff has got to stop. Then law enforcement can handle that. And as the sheriff just said, you can offer them the stick or the carrot. You can either go to jail or you can abide by our city ordinances. We have a place for you to go. We have a place for your dog. Everybody has a little dog. That can all be a little kennel put up, whatever.
Well, and this is what other communities have done, and this is, providing a location is one of the things that has to be done. The next thing is to engage your service community, your churches and your other non-governmental organizations locally that are in the providing service end of the spectrum to basically handle the individuals that need it.
Absolutely. So the short term is, what can we do to enforce our ordinances, the things that are happening at Beachfront Park, like last week with the young children down there. That could have turned, as you well know, Sheriff Wilson, how many years have you been in law enforcement? Ever since I've lived here, which has been 30 years.
36 years.
36 years. Okay, so I would consider you an expert in law enforcement. And you were a darn good sheriff.
Thank you.
Well, that could have turned, as you well know, to an extremely dangerous situation with
Absolutely.
a deranged person that's addicted, harassing young children. And I'm not trying to put down any one that's homeless or addicted, but it's just a fact. It could have turned into a dangerous situation. And so what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about public urination and defecation? Those are ugly words. Those are still illegal. Those are still illegal. They can be enforced. The drinking and drugs in public is still illegal. They can be enforced, whether it's a misdemeanor or whatever. At least they can be moved along or approached by an officer of the law and saying, hey, you've got to stop this. You need to move along. The trash and the sewage left in the parks by the motorhomes is illegal. Having an open sewage to your motorhome draining into a container, which we have at one of the motorhomes down there, has a leaky sewage or gray water, whatever. They're both illegal. Draining, it runs off into the beach. Cholera lasts over 200 days in salt water. So someone said this encampment they had recently on Pebble Beach, Supervisor Calvin was instrumental in getting that removed. Fish and Game, I think, ended up being the enforcement agency on that. Right. Well, there was a huge fecal problem. Just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So somebody made the comment, well, wait till the rains come. It'll just clean it out. Well, I hate to tell you folks out there that surf and have children, cholera that comes from human waste lasts over 200 days. I think it's closer to 300 days in salt water. So let's go wade in the water a little bit down at Beachfront Park. What do you say, Dean?
Yeah.
Sadly, we've had some of the most pristine waters in the world here in Del Norte County. So let's work to protect those while we work to help these people. So anyways, the tiny house idea is not feasible in my mind. It's too expensive. They're about $2,000 each house. Houses a couple people. For $1,500 or $3,000, you can get one of these Army tents. It'll house 45 people. Wow. 45 people. And so I had proposed putting it up at the old juvenile hall facility out where there's some structures, there's electric, there's sewer, there's power. That's not a real popular idea, but it's not in a neighborhood residential area. It's in more of an industrial area. I know that the probation department doesn't care for it because they've got juvenile hall out there. But those things should be working. So as Sheriff Wilson was saying, you've got to have the money, you've got to have the location. So for $75,000, you can buy these tents. For $150,000 to $200,000, you could staff them and feed the 300 people for a year. And then, of course, you'd own the tents outright. They could be used for emergencies, for tsunami, any of that kind of thing.
Well, we have, like I say, they have some of those types of tents already in this community.
Do they?
Oh, yeah.
Someone told me that
the
emergency
hospital
services might have them.
Emergency services has access to them. The hospital has one. And like I say, one of the things that happened, especially after 9/11, is literally billions of dollars were spent in communities, and a lot of that wasted, because But so there's a lot of that material that's out there that
could be
sure
used
within emergency services through the military. You can get for a whole lot less than that. Yeah.
I would imagine so. We can get them used for $1,500.
Yeah.
But they didn't have enough used tents at this facility. They had to go with the new ones. So the new ones are about $3,000. But brick and mortar, Los Angeles is talking about, they've got 60,000 dishoused people. They're talking about spending $700,000 per unit to house these 60,000 people.
Well,
Can you imagine?
Government's good at spending money.
We can't even afford to buy our own house. I would love a new house. So then you've got tax-paying citizens that can't afford a brand new $700,000 apartment.
Yeah.
And up here, brick and mortar, Supervisor Chairperson Calvin was stating they've got a grant in place that they need to find a contractor that would be willing to take on the grant and build it out, a brick and mortar facility. Well, can you imagine? My head is exploding right now thinking of the cost.
Well, you look at San Francisco.
We can't afford that.
Yeah, you look at San Francisco. They've already spent over $1 billion trying to resolve their homeless. They have approximately 10,000 homeless on their streets.
That's all.
Yeah, and you could easily give them each $1 million and would have saved yourself a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
Although you give $1 million to an addict, all you're going to get is a dead addict. Because they're going to spend it on their drugs. It is an addiction problem, not a homeless problem.
That's right.
You can buy them a mansion; they would still not live in it.
That's right.
Their addiction would cause them to sell it so they could have the money.
Did you hear on the same show with Dr. Drew Pinsky, the Venice Stakeholders Association representative Travis Bynum? Did you hear that part?
I may have. It sounds familiar.
We would love to have the president's help. 3 homeless dying every day, feces, needles, only getting worse under Mayor Garcetti. The federal government owns 46% of the land in California. If you go 50 miles east of LA, the land is inexpensive. It needs to be developed. You could give people jobs, paving roads, putting in drywall, green energy, solar panels, windmills, so many options. Immediately give people beds, toilets, and showers.
Well, I agree with that to a point, but as the sheriff was stating, like the person that is in my life, I was guardian of, became an addict at 18 years old. I've continued to let him come to the house with Steffi and I shower once a week, things like that. And then I kind of had to cut him off from that because, as he told me, he liked the dark side. He enjoyed the lifestyle until they get locked up. And then, of course, they're sorry. But the fact is, unless you do something to alleviate the drug problem, all the housing in the world is not going to help. Because as the sheriff so aptly put it, and just on a side note, the owners of Ace Hardware are generous people. A while back, she bought a hotel room for some homeless folks and put it on her credit card. You may have read this. And the next day, they were called by the hotel. The homeless people had spread feces all over the walls, They had trashed the hotel room beyond belief. Not appreciative. That's mental illness. That's addiction and mental illness. So luckily for her, she was so afraid they were going to charge her credit card to restore the room. The hotel ate the cost on that because they knew she was trying to do something kind. And so like I said before, we're not trying to be unkind to anybody. We're not trying to down the homeless. But there's reality. There's facts. And the sheriff is an expert in this field. He knows the facts. I've studied it a little bit. But the sheriff's an expert. He knows these facts. These people will not change unless you offer them a way to get better. And if they don't want to get better, the laws need to be changed so that we can incarcerate those and give them a way out of their addiction. So, you know, this tent city that I had proposed, it would give law enforcement the ability to enforce our ordinances, because then, according to the Ninth Circuit, we have the shelter in place for, you know, $75,000. We could then go ahead and enforce our ordinances. This kind of camp, I met a gentleman on Facebook who might be willing to help. He's an Army veteran. He ran a camp for 5,000 refugees, Haitians and Cuban refugees in Guantanamo. He says this plan can work with the tents. You can have all the facilities there. It is considered alternative shelter under the current ruling, according to the Discovery Institute in Seattle. I think it's the cheapest and the quickest thing to do that would both help people and give law enforcement the avenue to enforce our ordinances. And then that along with voting to change the state laws as they are that promote addiction. And as Dr. Drew was saying, you're actually guilty of homicide by promoting this addiction because they end up dead.
Yeah, it's not compassion.
No.
To stand by and watch people suffer, and especially when it's needless suffering. And what we have done is through our laws and through the ideology of decriminalizing drug behavior, we've turned our streets into these experiments.
Yeah, Tombstone, Arizona.
And unfortunately, it is not compassion to sit by and watching these people do the things that they're doing to themselves and to our communities.
You know, the sheriff is absolutely correct. It's not compassion. The headline to that piece that the think tank in Seattle wrote, the Discovery Institute, we can try to get that out online. If anybody, you can Google it, the Discovery Institute, and look it up. But the headline to that piece was the ruinous, if I'm saying that right, the ruinous practice of compassion. $1 billion a year. It didn't do anything but attract more people there. A certain percentage of people need help. A certain percentage of people want to game the system because the laws are weak. That's just an actual fact. So I'm proposing a solution here. We all know there's a big problem. The tent city is a solution. We need money. We need a location. Another solution is to vote, all of us to vote to change these laws, elect officials that want to change these laws on drugs. We need money for the sheriff's department to get a task force back. They may not need one now under these current laws, but they don't have the money for it. Target the heroin and meth dealers. As the president has said, he wants to start charging heroin dealers with murder if they're responsible for someone's overdose and death. That sounds good to me. It's just fueling this epidemic. Using existing federal monies for mental health services that have been currently refused by the state just this last year. Can you imagine that? They refused the money. They also had a bill before the state legislature. Dr. Drew spoke of this. They were trying to make it easier for the local communities to get conservatorship over those that are mentally ill or deranged. It was blocked in the state legislature. Because once you have conservatorship, then a doctor can say, hey, this guy has a real problem. He's going to die because of his addiction and his lifestyle. So therefore, we're going to force him into rehab, giving him a chance to better his life. Now, that's compassion. People would say you can't. That's compassion, giving a person the chance to change their life. Not everybody's going to take that chance, but then they can be dealt with by law enforcement. So I say we all have something to say as far as we see it everywhere. So I would say if you see something, say something. Call your local law enforcement. The police, the city police seem to have more of a problem because there's so much more of it in the downtown area. I was told the sheriff moves people along a little more effectively. But I think it's just a matter of myself that they seem to congregate more within the city limits.
In the county, you tend to have out of sight, out of mind. They tend
Yeah.
to find themselves in the bushes and in the areas that aren't so clearly evident.
Visible.
Yeah.
But it is a problem for everyone.
Jerry Johnson has had a horrible time getting approval to use McCarthy Center. So
Well, that's out there they have the old mental health building, which is handicap accessible.
but you said you could use the tent there. You don't have to.
Well, there's
repair.
room there for tents and the buildings. So my plan would be to use those. There's 2 schoolrooms that are modular. We could get donated labor to build those 2 schoolrooms into bathroom and shower facilities, fairly inexpensively, comparatively speaking. A trailer that houses 10 shower units, you can buy those mobile trailers. They're $100,000. And Supervisor Chairperson Cowan is actually trying to get a used type of a deal like that right now. But those facilities that are out there, they're currently being used for storage by the county. I think that they could be better used as a place to help these people. But you've got mental health building. It's a big building. So then you've got the 2 classrooms could be used as bathrooms. You have the old juvenile jail itself. There may even be a kitchen at one time that was in that building. So you've got power, you've got sewer, I believe, out there.
Yeah.
You've got all these things existing. It wouldn't take much more money to build that out. Then there's a basketball court. There could be tents there. I think that is a much more realistic short-term solution than, say, if you go out behind Safeway, it's a hazardous waste site. So you would have to put a barrier down, like some sort of a plastic barrier, and bring dirt on top of it to make it legally inhabitable by people, even for tents. So that's out of the question. It's going to cost millions of dollars. If you have a vacant lot somewhere, well, then you've got to have electricity by law to qualify as an alternative shelter. You've got to have heat. You've got to have water. So that's very expensive. We cannot afford to do that. But we could afford to move the storage from the McCarthy Center to another location, even if it's a metal barn, much less expensive.
Let's do it.
And then I was going to work with Home Depot. Home Depot is very civic-minded. I think we can get donations of fixtures. You can build banks of showers and toilets in there for an inexpensive amount comparatively. And then you'd have to have, we were going to talk about the veterans helping us to run it. You'd have to have a security presence there from the veterans or someone. So it would cost a little bit to run it. But I think there's enough people that care that we could start a campaign to take donations. It has to be through a nonprofit. So money is the big thing. And then to try to get the county to see that. I know probation does not like the idea because I've heard that, because juvenile hall is there. But I think, well, others are going to complain if it's in their backyard, a residential area. I would think it'd be good to have them next to law enforcement. Maybe people would want to behave a little bit more. I don't know, Sheriff. What do you think?
The only problem in that area that I'm aware of, is, of course, is you've got the apartments right there, and then Tonaville Apartments. And
You do have the apartments.
And then you have also the mobile home park that backs onto some of that property over there. Mm-hmm. And so, other than those 2 areas of residential, kids,
You got suburban propane
kids
in
and
the
other
front.
things in there are things that you would have to, issues you'd have to come to terms with, within that community, because you do have kids there, you do have school buses come and go, and the mobile home park with a lot of seniors, so it is even though it is more of an industrial area, there are still issues amongst that area that
Someone
are
told me the
concerns.
other day that the fairgrounds might be willing to rent a spot to us It's paved, or the parking area in the back. But then you have the issue of, you have to move it at fair time. So there's not a lot of easy answers. There's other properties available, but they're vacant, empty lots.
We need to come to terms with the problems at McCarthy.
Yeah.
That's the place.
There is a fence there, chain link. You could strengthen that fence, maybe put human barbed wire. That sounds horrible. But you might be able to make that place more secure. What do you think, Sheriff?
Wherever you build it, whatever you do, there has to be a security component with it, because again, people that are coming, especially within the homeless population, you have a lot of individuals, males, females, children, that sometimes that you need to make sure that when they're there, that they have a sense of safety and security.
Absolutely.
And so within those facilities, you have to build that kind of a component with it.
But for those that are listening today, we thank you for listening to, it's a community problem. It's not a city or a county problem. It's a community problem. Supervisor Gitlin and Supervisor Cowan at this point have been the most directly involved that I'm aware of, along with the mayor and the city manager. They've all shown that they have a very big interest in helping. We're here to help. We're not here to condemn anybody. But unless you learn the facts, you cannot change the facts. You've got to learn the issues first. And so we've pointed out the issues to you all today. We're not trying to condemn anybody. We're compassionate people. But this is a reality. It's going to get worse. It is worse already. But as the sheriff can speak to, it's going to get way worse. Now, I've got an alarm on my house and 5 big dogs, and I sleep with my shotgun next to me. And I've been robbed. I've been robbed at the bakery. The triplicate was robbed last week of all their computers. We've got to have a society that's going to be good for our children to grow up in, that's going to be safe for our elderly people, and it's going to be safe for the homeless and the addicted.
Well, what we're doing is not working not only for the community, but it's definitely not working for those individuals out there.
Yeah.
It's not helping them through their issues and their problems with addiction as well as mental health. And California, unfortunately, has been an abysmal failure where mental health has been concerned ever since we
Reagan shut down
our facilities and turned many of these individuals out. And when I was sheriff, it was one of the hardest and most painful things to see, where unfortunately a lot of our local jails had become really the mental health backstop in our communities and in our state.
That's sad.
And when you have individuals sitting in your jails that their truly only problem is mental health issues, and what they would end up unfortunately breaking the law either because of addictive behavior, because they're trying to self-medicate themselves through their mental health issues, or they would commit crimes due to their mental health.
Yes.
Whether they were acting out through violence or acting out through aggression.
Yes.
But had they been on medication, had they been in a facility, or had they been
mandated,
had they been in a care facility due to their severe mental illness, they would have a quality of life far better than what they were exhibiting and dealing with today.
And a safety net, And what's just since you brought that up again, last year California turned away millions of dollars for residential treatment, mental health treatment facilities in this state.
Why?
Well, from what I've heard from others, and my personal view is, California is well on its way to not a socialist state per se, but the majority, like in our town, for instance, every town has a master plan. And within those master plans, they speak to how many dollars are coming from tourism, how many dollars are coming from industry, how many dollars are coming from the federal government, from welfare, from services. In our town, I think it's about 60% of our dollars come from the federal government and services, welfare, HUD, all these different things. If you allow that to take over, pretty soon there's no business. So you've got to kind of put a new horse in front of the cart. Maybe we need, new leadership in our state. But we've got to start thinking about people that are working people paying the taxes. Otherwise, you don't have a society left if you take that to the extreme.
Well, it all fails over time.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
just a big failure.
Socialism never works because you have to have more producers than you have.
You got to give me all
makers
your
than-
money, Sheriff.
You have to have more makers than takers.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And unfortunately, we're seeing at this point in time where the bend is going to where soon, or if not already in our society, 52% I think is where it's at right now. We have more people getting assistance from the government than those that are providing the funds to pay for this.
That's right.
And eventually you become Venezuela.
That's right.
You fall apart. Things fail.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. I sure thank you for coming out on a drizzly Sunday.
Thank you.
Kevin Bingham and Dean Wilson visiting us today, special guests. And we're at KFUG 101.1 on your FM dial. It's 8 minutes after 5.